My name is Stephanie Baker, and I'm 32 years old. And everything started last August, on a stage in Seattle, under lights so bright they made the room look forgiving. I'd just been named Promising Architect of Seattle. 2 years of my life lived inside blueprints, models, late night revisions, and quiet sacrifices that no one posted about. I designed a cultural center meant to blend art and technology, something that felt like a bridge between worlds, something that felt like me. When they called my name, a warm shock went through my body. My hands shook as I stood up, and for a moment I let myself believe, just for that moment, that I had finally earned a seat at my own family table. From the audience, I spotted them. My mom and dad, Richard and Catherine Baker, sitting stiff and polished like they'd dressed for court, not their daughter's biggest night. And beside them, Olivia. Olivia didn't clap like everyone else. She clapped like she was being watched. Next to the aisle, my boyfriend Ethan squeezed my fingers hard enough to bring me back into my body. "You did it," he whispered, smiling like he'd been holding his breath for me all year. I wanted to hold on to that smile, because Ethan was the one person who never acted like my dreams were cute. But even Ethan came with complications now. His ex-girlfriend, Marina, had slid into Olivia's orbit months ago. Networking events, donor galas, that glossy legal crowd where people called themselves connectors like it was a personality. Marina wasn't the reason Ethan and I got together, but Olivia loved bringing her up like a warning label. As if my life was a courtroom too, and everyone had evidence. On stage, I accepted the award with my voice trembling, part emotion, part fear. "This means so much to me," I said into the microphone, "not just as recognition for my work, but as an opportunity to contribute to my family's firm as a consulting architect, if they'll have me." The words sounded brave, they tasted naive. I looked toward my family after the applause, hoping for one sincere expression, one crack in the ice. My parents smiled politely, distant. Olivia smirked, like she'd just heard a joke that wasn't meant for the room. And something in me sank, quietly, like an elevator cable snapping. At the reception afterward, people clustered around me with champagne flutes and warm congratulations. My colleagues talked about my design as if it mattered, because to them, it did. Then I heard the sound that always meant my father had decided the room belonged to him. A champagne glass tapped with a fork. The crowd shifted. Conversations faded. My dad stepped forward, smiling the way he smiled in family photos. Wide, practiced, hollow. "Tonight," Richard said loudly, "we're not just celebrating Stephanie's little success. Little, but also much bigger news." I felt Ethan's hand tighten on my back. My dad turned, beaming toward Olivia like she was the actual award. "Olivia, our only truly talented daughter, has officially been appointed vice president of the company." Applause exploded. Not from my parents' friends, not from people who understood the family, from my colleagues, my mentors, donors, people who came for me and were now clapping for the woman who'd just stolen my oxygen. I stood there with a smile that hurt my face. Olivia didn't even look surprised. She looked satisfied, like this was the correct order of the universe being restored. I drifted toward the balcony because I could feel something hot building behind my eyes. Seattle rain misted the air and stuck to my lashes. Ethan followed me out. "Steph," he started softly. But before he could finish, the balcony door opened again. Olivia stepped out like she owned the weather. She leaned on the railing, her eyes sliding over me the way you inspect a stain you don't want guests to notice. "You should know your place," she said. "Architecture is a hobby, not a real career." The words hit with surgical precision, because Olivia never wasted cruelty. She used it like punctuation. I turned toward her, ready to speak, but my mother appeared behind us, like a shadow that smelled faintly of perfume and disappointment. Catherine put her hand on my shoulder. Not comfort, control. "You should be happy for your sister," she said sharply, "instead of ruining an important family night with your selfishness." Selfish. That word again. The one they always used when I wanted anything that didn't serve Olivia. Ethan stepped forward. "That's not—" Olivia's gaze snapped to him. "Careful, Ethan," she said, sweet as syrup. "You don't want Marina hearing you defend the wrong person." Ethan froze. Not because he loved Marina, because Olivia knew exactly where to press to make everyone feel exposed. I pulled away from my mother's hand. The cold I felt wasn't from the rain. It was from realizing that even on my best night, my brightest moment, I was still being asked to shrink. And I didn't know yet that the dinner a week later would be the moment everything turned from cruel to dangerous. A week after the awards, my family insisted we all have dinner at Metropolitan Grill. My grandparents, James and Eleanor Martin, promised to come too. Grandma Eleanor had once sat for hours at my first college exhibit, smiling at crooked models like they were masterpieces. Grandpa James called me the family architect, as if it was a title worth keeping. So I walked into that restaurant believing, against all evidence, that maybe tonight would be different. But 20 minutes passed, then 25. My grandparents still hadn't arrived. Olivia sat with her calm, cold eyes. My parents looked irritated, as if my excitement about my award was a childish inconvenience. A $100 Wagyu steak sat in front of me untouched, because every conversation, every single one, was about Olivia's latest legal victory. Dad raised his glass. "Olivia's brilliance," he said. Mom nodded. "She swayed an entire jury," Catherine added, pride practically dripping. I cleared my throat gently. "I've been thinking about a project that combines green spaces with modern architecture." Olivia cut in immediately, turning to our parents like I hadn't spoken. "Judge Watson gave me a new case," she said. "Complicated, but I know how to make it disappear." The way she said it, casual, confident, made my stomach tighten. I tried again. "I could design a new office layout for the firm. Something modern, something that—" Dad shook his head. "We need professional architects for that," he said firmly. I blinked. "I am—" "Stephanie," my mother sighed, "don't make everything about you." I felt heat crawl up my throat. The table next to ours started glancing over. I heard the faint sound of someone's chair scraping, the subtle hush that means strangers are starting to watch. Something inside me snapped, not loud, not dramatic, just final. I put my fork down, and I looked straight at my parents. "All my life," I said, voice shaking, "I've tried to be recognized. 32 years of being compared to Olivia. 32 years of being told my interests don't matter because her career is, what? More respectable? More useful? More you." My mother's mouth tightened. Her annoyance was immediate, clean, practiced. "You've always been jealous of your sister," Catherine said. "It's time you grow up and accept that not everyone can be as exceptional as Olivia." Olivia leaned forward, her eyes bright with that quiet cruelty I knew too well. "You've always been the lesser one," she said, smiling. "That's why you'll never truly be part of the Baker legacy." I heard a soft gasp from somewhere behind me. And then, without thinking, without planning, my hand slid into my bag and closed around my phone. If they wanted to perform my humiliation in public, I could make sure the world saw it too. I hit record. I raised the phone slightly. Olivia's eyes flicked to it, and her expression turned to pure contempt. "Look at you," she said. "This is why you're never trusted in business. Too childish, too emotional." My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I stared into the camera and said, with a shaking voice I barely recognized as mine, "This is the prestigious Baker family, the one where the younger daughter doesn't deserve recognition because she's just an architect." My mom's face changed. Something dark flashed across it. "Stephanie Baker," she hissed, "turn that phone off right now." But I didn't. And that was the moment I unknowingly lit the fuse. I didn't even hear the chair legs scrape as my mom stood up. All I saw was her hand, pale, manicured, perfectly steady, moving across the table like she'd done it 1,000 times in her head. The slap landed with a crack so sharp it made the restaurant fall silent. For half a second, everything stopped. The clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation, even the soft jazz playing somewhere near the bar. My face burned. My lips split against my teeth. I tasted iron. And the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the sound that followed. People inhaling, phones lifting, a ripple of shocked curiosity rolling outward like my humiliation was entertainment. My dad stood too, eyes red with rage. "You don't deserve the Baker name," Richard said, pointing at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong family. I sat there frozen, my phone still recording, my hands shaking so hard the camera wobbled. Then instinct took over. I grabbed my bag, stumbled back from the table, and ran. I don't remember the elevator. I don't remember the valet stand. I only remember the rain hitting my face like cold needles as I reached my car. Ethan called after me, my name breaking in his throat, but I couldn't turn around. If I did, I'd fall apart right there on the sidewalk. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed against my mouth, trying to keep my breathing from turning into sobs. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Grandpa James." My vision blurred as I answered. "Stephanie?" His voice was tight, confused. "Your grandma and I just arrived. Where are you? We can't find you anywhere." My throat tightened so fast it felt like swallowing glass. I lied. "I got an emergency call from work," I whispered. "I had to leave. I'm sorry." Silence. Then Grandpa James exhaled, slow and disappointed, not in me, but in the whole situation he didn't fully understand yet. "All right," he said quietly. "Go handle what you need." I ended the call and pulled over under a streetlight that made the rain look like falling ash. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, lip bleeding, mascara smudged, eyes red like I'd been poisoned by my own family. Then I did the thing I'd never dared to do before. I posted the video, not under my name, not where my parents' friends could connect it to us. I put it on Reddit, anonymous, buried under a throwaway username that made me feel like a ghost telling her own story. I expected maybe a few comments, a little validation, a small echo saying, "You're not crazy." They really did that. What I got was a wildfire. Within hours, the clip was everywhere, stitched, reposted, analyzed by strangers who didn't know my family, but understood cruelty when they saw it. People called my mother violent, called my father narcissistic, called Olivia something colder. And somewhere in that flood of attention, the video reached the one person I didn't expect. Grandma Eleanor. My grandparents didn't use the internet, not the way I did. But Grandpa James followed local news like it was a ritual. Seattle business stories, community reports, anything that smelled like civic reputation. And once something is public enough, it finds its way into even the quietest houses. That night, in my small Capitol Hill apartment, I watched the comments stack higher and higher, my stomach tight, my hands cold. Then my phone chimed again. A message from Grandpa James, 8 a.m. tomorrow. Our house. Everyone must be present. No emojis, no softness, no please. Just a command. My chest tightened. Part of me expected a lecture. How I'd embarrassed the family, how I'd crossed a line, how I'd forced his hand. Because for most of my life, when Olivia won, everyone smiled. And when I hurt, everyone told me to be quiet. I barely slept. At 7:52 a.m., I pulled into my grandparents' driveway on Mercer Island and saw what looked like every car in my family lined up like an execution. My parents' sedan, Olivia's sleek black SUV, even Ethan's car, parked awkwardly near the curb because he'd insisted on coming, even though I told him not to. "You shouldn't walk in alone," he'd said, voice steady but eyes worried. "Not after last night." And I wanted to believe he meant that only emotionally. But later I'd realize he meant something else too, something he couldn't fully explain because he didn't have proof yet. Inside, the house felt too quiet. The air had that heavy, old money smell, polished wood, clean linen, coffee that had been sitting too long because nobody had touched it. My parents sat stiff on the couch, faces like stone. Olivia stood near the fireplace, arms folded, calm as if this was all beneath her. Grandpa James stood in the center of the living room with his cane planted like a judge's gavel. Grandma Eleanor sat beside him, hands trembling in her lap. When I walked in, Grandma's eyes went to my mouth. The split lip, the faint bruise blooming along my cheekbone. Her face crumpled, and that was the first time I saw it. Real grief, not disappointment, not annoyance. Pain. Grandpa James tapped his cane 3 times on the hardwood. The sound snapped through the room. Then he pointed at the iPad on the coffee table without a word. The video played, my voice shaking. "This is the prestigious Baker family." My mother's hiss. "Turn that phone off right now." The slap. The silence. My father's words. "You don't deserve the Baker name." When it ended, nobody moved. Grandma Eleanor's tears slid down her cheeks slowly, like she didn't even have the strength to wipe them away. She turned to my mom, her own daughter, with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not fury, disbelief. "You did that," Grandma whispered, voice thin and breaking, "to your own child." My dad leaned forward, defensive like he was in court. "This was family discipline," Richard said sharply. "Stephanie needs to toughen up if she wants to survive in the real world." My mom jumped in, eyes flashing with anger the moment she got the floor. "And she humiliated us publicly," Catherine said, pointing at me like I'd committed a crime. "She needs to learn consequences." Grandpa James waited until they were done. Then he straightened, the way he used to straighten when he stood to speak at fundraisers. Dignified, calm, terrifying. "Richard," he said, "Catherine." His voice went quiet, which somehow made it louder. "We're considering changing our will." My mom blinked. My dad's jaw tightened. Grandpa James continued, each word measured. "Removing both of you from inheriting assets worth $8 million. The room froze. Even Olivia's posture shifted. Barely, but I saw it, a fractional tightening of her shoulders. Grandma Eleanor stood beside him, wiping her tears with a shaking hand, her eyes hardening into something steel. "You will apologize to Stephanie," Grandma said, "and you will change how you treat her. If not, the will changes. All of it. The family becomes fair again." My heart pounded so hard it hurt, because I'd fantasized about this moment, someone defending me. But I'd never believed it would actually happen. Grandpa James nodded once, final. "You have 1 month," he said. Prove you deserve the legacy you've been feeding on. Treat Stephanie like she belongs in this family, or you lose it. For a moment, warmth spread through my chest so fast I almost couldn't breathe. A knot I'd carried my whole life loosened. But then I looked at Olivia. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just stared at my grandparents with eyes that felt blank, like a calculator running numbers. As everyone began to stand, chairs scraping, my mom muttering frantic promises she didn't mean, my dad looking like he'd swallowed a nail, I heard Olivia in the hallway. Her voice was low, controlled, pressed to her phone. "No," she said. "We need to handle this situation. I know how to make it look like an accident." I stopped breathing. For 1 second, my brain tried to rationalize. She's talking about a case. She's talking about work. That's what I always did with Olivia. Gave her the benefit of the doubt because the truth felt too ugly to hold. But something about the way she said accident, it didn't sound like law. It sounded like planning. I backed up quietly, my skin prickling. And that was when Olivia appeared in front of me like she'd summoned herself. She grabbed my arm. Her nails dug in hard enough to sting. She leaned close, lips near my ear, voice soft like a lover's secret. "You don't know what you've just destroyed," Olivia whispered. "I spent 15 years building this legacy." I tried to pull away, but her grip tightened. Her breath was warm. Her eyes were cold. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just hurt by my sister. I was afraid of her. The next week passed in a blur of fake apologies. My mother sent texts like, "We love you, families fight, let's move forward." My father offered stiff phone calls that sounded rehearsed. Olivia sent me a long message, sweet, almost sisterly. "I'm sorry if my words hurt you. I just worry you don't understand how the world works. I want peace, Steph." Reading it made my stomach twist, because the tone was perfect. Too perfect. Like someone writing a character. Ethan stayed close, watching me in that quiet way he had, like he was bracing for impact. And one night, when we lay in bed in the dark, he said something that made my blood go cold. "I need to tell you something," he whispered. I turned toward him. "What?" He hesitated. Then, "Marina called me today." My chest tightened. "Why?" Ethan swallowed. "She said Olivia asked her for favors. Media favors. Connections. She said Olivia's been making calls like she's preparing for a cleanup." I sat up, heart racing. "Cleanup of what?" Ethan shook his head. "Marina didn't know, or she wouldn't say. But she sounded scared, Steph." I stared at the ceiling. My mind replayed Olivia's whisper in the hallway. I know how to make it look like an accident. And then, late in August, the phone rang at 2 a.m. I jolted awake, fumbling for it with trembling hands. Grandpa James's voice came through, cracked and shaking. "Stephanie," he whispered, "your grandma is on her way to the hospital. She can't breathe." The world narrowed into a single point of terror. I was out the door before I fully woke up, driving through Seattle streets slick with rain, my hands clamped around the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping my life together. At Seattle Grace Hospital, Grandpa James was hunched in the waiting room, face pale, eyes wet. When he saw me, he grabbed my hand like he was drowning. "Thank God you're here," he whispered. I sat beside him, my voice barely functioning. "What happened?" He swallowed, voice breaking. "Olivia came for dinner," he said. "She brought a bottle of expensive red wine, insisted Eleanor drink it, said it would help her sleep." My chest tightened. "Did you drink it?" I asked. Grandpa shook his head. "No, I was tired. Only Eleanor," because Olivia kept insisting. A cold sensation slid down my spine. "Was Olivia there when Grandma got sick?" I asked. Grandpa James looked away, ashamed. "No, she left before it started. I called her when Eleanor began vomiting. She didn't pick up." A doctor approached then, introducing himself as Dr. Chun. He spoke calmly, professionally. "Eleanor is experiencing a severe allergic reaction," he said. "We haven't identified the cause yet." I stared at him. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "But she has no history of allergies," I said. "None." Dr. Chun hesitated. "Sometimes these things develop." I cut in, careful but firm. "I want blood samples taken," I said. "Test for toxins." The doctor's brows knit together. "Why would you—" Because saying the truth out loud felt like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. I looked at Grandpa James's trembling hands, looked at the fear in his eyes. Then I leaned closer to Dr. Chun and lowered my voice. "Our family is complicated," I said. "There was a will threatened to be changed. My sister was involved with my grandmother last night, and I need you to please take this seriously." The doctor studied me for a long moment. Then, slowly, his expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "I'll request it," he said. An hour later, a nurse came out and told us Grandma Eleanor had regained consciousness. We rushed into the room. Grandma's skin looked gray, her lips dry, her eyes wide with fear. When she saw me, she tried to sit up, weak, frantic. She gripped my hand with surprising strength, and with a voice barely above a whisper, she said the words that would haunt me forever. "Don't leave me alone with Olivia again." She swallowed, eyes shining. Something wasn't right with that wine. I stood there, frozen, my blood turning to ice. Because now it wasn't just my suspicion. It was my grandmother's fear. And I realized too late that Olivia wouldn't stop at humiliation. If Olivia had truly decided I was an obstacle, then my family had just entered a war we weren't prepared to fight. 3 days later, the hospital called. I stepped outside my office to take it. The Seattle skyline blurred behind me, like I was standing inside someone else's life. Dr. Chun's voice was different this time, measured, careful. "Stephanie," he said quietly, "the toxicology report came back." My grip tightened on the phone. "There were traces of a low-dose anticoagulant compound," he continued, "commonly found in rat poison." The world didn't shatter. It narrowed. Like everything I'd suspected had just been confirmed in a single cold sentence. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked. "She's stable," he said, "but if the dose had been slightly higher..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I hung up and stood there for a full minute, staring at nothing. Olivia hadn't made a mistake. She'd calculated. Low dose, hard to detect, something that could pass as a reaction, an accident. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Olivia. "How's Grandma? I've been so worried. I couldn't sleep." I felt my stomach twist. Her timing was surgical. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove straight to Mercer Island to tell Grandpa James the truth in person. But when I pulled into the driveway, something was wrong. The front door was open. Not wide, just slightly, enough to show it hadn't been closed properly. I rushed up the steps, heart pounding. Inside, the living room was chaos. Drawers pulled out, cushions overturned, papers scattered across the hardwood floor like someone had shaken the house upside down. 2 police officers stood near the hallway. Grandpa James was sitting in his armchair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "What happened?" I demanded, breathless. "One of the neighbors called," an officer said. "Your grandfather returned from the hospital and found the door forced open." "Was anything taken?" I asked. The officer shook his head. "That's the strange part. Nothing valuable appears missing." Grandpa James pointed weakly toward the small office near the back of the house. "The safe," he said. They opened it, looked through everything. The safe contained one thing that mattered more than jewelry or cash. The will, the property documents, the future. "But nothing's gone," Grandpa added. "Everything's still there." Still there, which meant this wasn't theft. It was inspection. Someone checking. Making sure the changes hadn't already been finalized. Or maybe making sure they could be undone. My pulse thundered in my ears. The officers continued dusting for prints, asking routine questions. I wandered down the hallway toward the study, stepping carefully over displaced papers. It didn't look random. It looked methodical, systematic, like someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Under the desk, partially hidden behind a fallen chair, something black caught my eye. A small handbag. I froze. I recognized it immediately. Olivia's. She'd carried it to the will meeting. I remembered because she'd placed it precisely beside her chair, like everything else in her life, controlled and deliberate. My hands felt numb as I bent down and pulled it toward me. I glanced over my shoulder. The officers were still talking to Grandpa. No one was watching me. I opened the bag. Inside was a dark red leather notebook. It felt heavy in my hands. I hesitated. Then I opened it. The first pages were notes from cases Olivia had defended. Murder trials, fraud, violent assaults. But what chilled me wasn't the cases. It was the annotations. Small, neat handwriting in the margins. Witness inconsistent. Apply pressure through custody leverage. Evidence chain vulnerable. Create doubt before lab confirmation. Emotional manipulation effective with juror type B. This wasn't just defense strategy. It was experimentation. I flipped further. Halfway through, a section header appeared in capital letters. Plan B. Martin Legacy. My throat went dry. Below it, how to handle obstacles without leaving traces. I felt the room tilt. Under that, a list of substances. Compounds. One of them circled in red ink. The same chemical Dr. Chun had just mentioned. Rat poison. My fingers trembled as I turned the page. Step-by-step notes on staging incidents. Allergic reaction plausible. Transfer documents under distress. Secure POA beforehand. Transfer documents under distress. Secure POA beforehand. Power of attorney. The letters blurred, and then the final page. Judge Williams, dismiss insufficient evidence. Followed by a list of names. Contacts. Potentially involved parties. I didn't know whether I was going to vomit or scream. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took photos of every page. My hands shook so badly I had to retake several shots. Then, my phone rang. I almost dropped it. The screen flashed a name that made my blood run cold. Olivia. I swallowed and answered. Steph, she said sweetly, we need to talk. Properly. Come to the office. Let's resolve this before it gets messy. Messy, like my grandmother's life had just been a stain. Okay, I said calmly, though my heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I'll be there. I slipped the notebook into my jacket pocket. I didn't tell Grandpa James what I'd found. He already looked exhausted, like the foundation under his life was cracking. And I needed to understand exactly how far Olivia was willing to go before I detonated everything. The Baker and Associates office was on the 34th floor. Glass walls, polished marble, the kind of space designed to intimidate before anyone even spoke. I'd always felt small there, like I was visiting someone else's empire. When I entered the main conference room, I immediately understood this wasn't reconciliation. It was theater. Olivia sat at the head of the table. My parents sat on either side of her, not beside each other. Beside her, the hierarchy clear as day. Stephanie, Olivia said brightly, thank you for coming. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I took a seat slowly. My phone rested in my palm under the table. Recording. My dad cleared his throat. I overreacted at the restaurant, he said in a voice that sounded rehearsed. I shouldn't have said what I did. My mom leaned forward, her hand reaching toward mine. We're a family, Catherine said softly. Families forgive. Forgive. The word almost made me laugh. Then my father slid a folder across the table toward me. To prove we're serious, he said, we've decided to offer you a small position in the company. Something stable, something respectable. My pulse slowed. Too easy. I opened the folder and felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't an employment contract. It was a legal declaration, renouncing all rights to my grandparents' estate. A permanent waiver, bold letters in the middle. Upon signing, Stephanie Baker relinquishes any and all future claims to properties, assets, and inheritance belonging to James and Eleanor Martin. My throat tightened. They weren't apologizing. They were erasing me. I looked up slowly. Olivia was watching me carefully, waiting. Testing. I know what happened to Grandma, I said calmly. The room shifted. Olivia's smile didn't fade. It sharpened. Without another word, I placed my phone on the table and played the recording of Dr. Chun confirming poison traces. The silence afterward felt electric. My mom leaned back, hand covering her mouth. My dad's face went rigid. Olivia tilted her head slightly. Nobody will believe you, she said evenly. Testing errors happen. Or maybe you're just desperate enough to fabricate something. I reached into my jacket and slid the notebook onto the table, opened it to Plan B, Martin Legacy. My mother's hand began to tremble. My father's jaw clenched. Olivia's eyes flicked down. And for the first time, I saw it. Fear, not panic. Calculation interrupted. What have you done? My mother whispered to Olivia. Olivia stood up suddenly, slamming her hand against the table. I know how to solve problems, she snapped. I know how to make things disappear. Her composure cracked, revealing something beneath. Something raw and dangerous. For 15 years, she continued, voice rising, I have helped powerful people walk away from crimes that should have buried them. I understand the system. I understand how to bend it. I stared at her. The law isn't something to bend, I said quietly. Olivia smiled coldly. That's what naive people think. She reached toward me suddenly, trying to grab the notebook. I pulled back instinctively, and in that split second, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. And I was the only piece she couldn't control anymore. I stood up quickly. I'm going to see Grandma, I said. Olivia's voice followed me as I turned toward the door. You should worry about yourself, Steph. Her tone was almost amused. By the time I reached Mercer Island again, the house was dark. Grandpa's car was gone. The lights were off. The door unlocked. My heart began pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears. I stepped inside. Silence. Too quiet. I called Grandpa's name. No answer. Then I noticed something on the floor near the hallway. A broken picture frame. Grandma's favorite photo. The one of all of us at the family cabin in the Cascades. The glass was shattered. And that's when I realized Olivia hadn't been trying to scare me. She'd been buying time. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. My grandparents are missing, I said, my voice cracking. And I think my sister has taken them. The operator asked questions. I answered what I could. Then I called Ethan. Stay where you are, he said immediately. But I couldn't. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew exactly where Olivia would go. The family cabin in the Cascade Mountains. Isolated, private, full of memories, and far enough away that screams would dissolve into trees. As I drove into the night, rain slicing across my windshield like warning lines, one thought looped over and over in my mind. Olivia didn't need the will changed. She just needed my grandparents controlled long enough to sign what she wanted. And if I had just exposed her, then I wasn't just an obstacle anymore. I was a liability. And liabilities get removed. By the time I reached the base of the mountain road, flashing blue lights cut through the rain. Detective Maya Rodriguez stood beside a patrol car, her dark hair pulled back tight, her eyes sharp and alert in a way that made everything else feel unfocused. She'd taken over the moment I mentioned poison and forged power of attorney. Not once had she treated me like a hysterical daughter. Now she stepped toward me as I slammed my car door. They confirmed it, she said immediately. Your grandmother was discharged this afternoon. Your sister presented a power of attorney. My stomach twisted, but it's forged, Rodriguez continued, jaw tightening. We verified the signature. She used it to take your grandmother. We're tracking phone signals now. A paramedic team and tactical unit were already preparing. My hands felt numb. She's not trying to kill them yet, I whispered, half to myself. She needs signatures. Rodriguez studied me. Explain. She doesn't need the will changed. She needs control. If she forces them to sign transfers, the assets move to my parents. And once my parents hold them, she controls everything. Rodriguez nodded once. And you? She eliminates me as a threat. No one spoke after that. The rain intensified as officers relayed updates through radios. Then, signal pinged, one of them called out. Device located near Cascade Sector 14, likely the family cabin. My heart dropped into my stomach. Rodriguez grabbed her radio. All units move. Quiet approach. The drive up the narrow mountain road felt endless. Headlights cut through sheets of rain, reflecting off soaked pine trunks. Every curve felt like it might be the last before something irreversible happened. My phone vibrated in my hand. Ethan, I'm behind you, he said. You shouldn't be here, I whispered. I'm not letting you do this alone, he replied. There was something steady in his voice that kept me from breaking. The cabin appeared through the trees like a memory gone wrong. Dark wood, wide windows, childhood summers now soaked in tension. Police vehicles stopped short of the clearing. Tactical officers spread into position. Rodriguez handed me a headset. You do exactly what I say, she told me. No hero moves. I nodded, even though my body was already vibrating with fear. Through the rain, a voice suddenly echoed from inside the cabin. Amplified, shrill. I have them, Olivia shouted. If you don't meet my demands, I end this now. The sound cut through the forest like a blade. Rodriguez lifted a loudspeaker. Olivia Baker, she called calmly. We're here to talk. Tell us what you want. There was a pause. Then Olivia's voice again. Steady, calculated. I want a lawyer present. I want the will documents amended. And I want all evidence Stephanie has destroyed. Destroyed. Like I was just a nuisance to be cleared. Rodriguez lowered the speaker and glanced at me. She's negotiating, she murmured. That means she's not ready to act. But then, a gunshot cracked through the night. My mother's scream echoed in my memory even though she wasn't there. For a split second, I couldn't breathe. Was that inside? I choked. Rodriguez listened carefully. Warning shot, she said tightly. Still buying time. Through binoculars, one of the officers reported what they could see. Male, elderly, tied to chair. Female, elderly on floor. Suspect holding firearm. My knees nearly buckled. Rodriguez caught my arm before I could move forward. She's escalating, Rodriguez said quietly. We need to control the narrative. I can talk to her, I said suddenly. Rodriguez looked at me sharply. That's risky. She still thinks I'm emotional. Predictable. Let her underestimate me. Rodriguez hesitated. Then she nodded once and handed me a phone connected to the cabin line. Keep her talking, she instructed. Long enough. The call connected. Silence on the other end. Then Olivia's voice, low and almost amused. Steph, of course you're there. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. Olivia, I said softly, this doesn't have to end like this. A bitter laugh. You did this, she replied. You forced this. No, I said quietly. Mom and Dad forced this. The pressure, the legacy. You've been carrying it alone. There was a pause. Rain pounded on the roof of the command vehicle. You don't understand what it's like, Olivia said, her voice lowering. To be told from childhood that failure isn't an option, that losing means you're nothing. I closed my eyes. I do understand, I said. I lived in it too, just on the other side. Silence again. Behind me, Rodriguez gave a subtle signal to the tactical team. Olivia's voice softened slightly. I built everything, she continued. 15 years. Perfect record, perfect image, judges who respect me, clients who fear me. And one will change destroyed that? I asked gently. It threatened control, she snapped. You were always weak, Steph, but now you're dangerous. There it was, the truth. You poisoned Grandma, I said quietly. She was an obstacle, Olivia replied without hesitation. The words landed heavier than the gunshot. An obstacle. I felt something inside me break. She loved you, I whispered. Another pause. Then, colder than anything I'd heard before, love doesn't secure assets. Rodriguez's eyes met mine. That was enough. She signaled. In a single coordinated movement, stun grenades exploded through the cabin windows. A flash of blinding white. A thunderclap. Olivia screamed. Tactical officers stormed in, shouting, shuffling, a crash of furniture. I dropped the phone and ran before anyone could stop me. Inside, smoke lingered in the air. My grandfather was tied to a wooden chair, bruised but alive. My grandmother lay on the floor, unconscious, an empty pill bottle beside her. Olivia was pinned to the ground, wrists restrained, still shouting through the haze. I know how to get away with it, she screamed. I've helped murderers walk free my whole career. Her face twisted, not frightened, furious, as if she'd been robbed of victory. I dropped to my knees beside Grandma Eleanor. Her pulse was faint, but there. Paramedics rushed in. They lifted her onto a stretcher, while Grandpa James reached for my hand, tears streaming down his face. She forced her, he whispered. She said it would look like suicide. My vision blurred. I stood slowly and looked at Olivia. She was on her knees, hair disheveled, mascara streaked, but her eyes were still calculating. Not remorseful, not broken, just angry that she'd been interrupted. As officers led her outside, she locked eyes with me and smiled. That smile stayed with me all the way to the hospital. Under the harsh white lights of the emergency room, doctors worked quickly to flush the sedatives from Grandma's system. Grandpa James sat beside her bed, shaking. I stood at the far wall, arms wrapped around myself like I was trying to hold my own body together. Rodriguez approached quietly. She had forged will documents in her bag, she said. Already signed, or trying to be. I closed my eyes. She wasn't improvising, I whispered. She was executing. Rodriguez nodded. Your parents are being questioned. There's evidence they covered up prior incidents involving her. I felt hollow, because even now, part of me had hoped this was some terrible spiral, some sudden break. But this was practice. Hours later, when Grandma stabilized, my parents arrived at the hospital. My mother rushed to the bedside sobbing. My father stood stiff, pale, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. We knew she was different, my mom whispered through tears. But we thought ambition would fix it. Ambition, as if morality were a career choice. Dad finally spoke, voice cracking. We taught her to win, he said, at any cost. I stared at them. You didn't create her, I said quietly, but you trained her. Neither of them argued. By dawn, the arrest was official. Charges stacked quickly. Attempted murder, kidnapping, illegal detention, forgery, assault. Olivia faced decades in prison. But as I watched her escorted into a police vehicle through the hospital window, rain washing down the glass between us, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something worse. Grief. Because my sister hadn't snapped. She'd revealed herself. And I still didn't know which version of her had been real. The perfect daughter. Or the woman who called her grandmother an obstacle. 3 months later, I would face her in court. But in that moment, standing under fluorescent hospital lights with Ethan's hand gripping mine and my grandparents fighting to recover, I understood something I hadn't before. Olivia hadn't just tried to control money. She had tried to control the story. And for the first time in her life, she lost. 3 months after the cabin, I stood outside courtroom 7 of the King County Courthouse with my palms pressed flat against the cold marble wall. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. I'd expected rage or panic or some cinematic collapse. Instead, I felt hollow, like the version of me who had once wanted my sister's approval had quietly died somewhere between the wine bottle and the gunshot. Inside the courtroom, everything smelled like polished wood and restrained judgment. Olivia sat at the defense table in an orange prison uniform, her dark hair pulled back neatly as if she were still attending a board meeting instead of facing attempted murder charges. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She didn't look ashamed. She looked irritated, as if this entire process were an inconvenience. The prosecutor laid out the charges one by one. Attempted murder with premeditation. Kidnapping. Illegal detention. Forgery of legal documents. Assault. Each word felt like a nail being hammered into the illusion my parents had spent decades protecting. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with slow, deliberate steps. I said my name clearly. Stephanie Baker, 32. I told them about the award night, how my father called it a little success, how my sister smirked, how the pattern of dismissal wasn't new. I described the dinner, the recording, the slap. Olivia's defense attorney objected frequently, trying to frame everything as sibling jealousy. Ms. Baker, he said smoothly, adjusting his tie, haven't you always struggled under your sister's success? The question hung in the air like bait. I looked at the jury. I struggled under her protection, I said calmly. There's a difference. The courtroom went quiet. I walked them through the hospital night, the toxicology report, the break-in, the black notebook. When the prosecution projected photos of the page labeled Plan B, Martin Legacy, a visible ripple passed through the jury. Olivia's expression did not change. When Detective Rodriguez testified, her voice was steady and clinical. She described the cabin scene with precision, Grandpa James tied to a chair, Grandma Eleanor unconscious on the floor, the pill bottle. Then the prosecution introduced digital evidence, Olivia's search history, her notes, her messages referencing timing, dosage, and removing variables. The defense tried to argue manipulation of context, but the timeline was airtight. And then my grandmother was wheeled in. The entire courtroom shifted. Grandma Eleanor looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, but her voice, when she spoke, did not tremble. She told me to drink it, Grandma said. She said it would help me sleep. She paused, swallowing, and when I asked why she looked so serious, she said I worry too much. A soft murmur passed through the room. Olivia didn't blink. My mother testified next. She looked older than she had 3 months earlier. When she admitted that Olivia had been expelled at 15 for threatening a teacher and that the family had used influence to bury it, the courtroom atmosphere thickened. My father followed. His voice cracked when he said, "We taught her that winning mattered more than anything." I watched them unravel in real time. For the first time in my life, they weren't defending her. They were confessing. After 3 days of testimony and 4 hours of jury deliberation, we stood when the verdict was read. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. The word echoed. On the charge of kidnapping, guilty. One by one, every count, guilty. Olivia's jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. When the judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison, I expected some release inside my chest. Relief. Vindication. Instead, I felt something colder. Finality. Because no matter what happened next, we would never be a family in the way we once pretended to be. Part 6. The last conversation. 6 months after the trial, after therapy sessions that felt like excavating my own childhood, I made a decision that surprised even me. I asked to visit Olivia. The Washington Women's Correctional Facility sat an hour outside Seattle, gray and silent beneath an overcast sky. Security doors clanged behind me one by one. Each metal click felt like a chapter closing. When Olivia entered the visiting room, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, her face sharper, her eyes less polished, but not softer. We sat across from each other at a small plastic table. No handcuffs, just distance. I didn't come with anger. I came with one question. Why? I asked. The word felt heavier than it should have. Olivia looked down at her hands for a long moment. Then she looked back up. I've always known I was different, she said quietly. I don't feel guilt the way other people do. The honesty was more disturbing than denial would have been. I see patterns, she continued. I see weaknesses. I know how to move people. That's why I succeeded. You hurt Grandma, I said. She was an obstacle, Olivia replied. The same word. Obstacle. Did you ever love her? I asked. Olivia tilted her head slightly, as if analyzing the question instead of answering it. Love is inefficient, she said finally. I felt something inside me close permanently. Do you regret it? I asked. She met my eyes without blinking. I regret not finishing it, she said. The words didn't shock me anymore. They confirmed what I already understood. She wasn't broken. She was consistent. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. They never pressured you the way they pressured me, she said softly. They needed me perfect. And they needed me invisible, I replied. For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes. Not remorse. Recognition. As I stood to leave, she reached out instinctively and touched my wrist. Don't disappear, she said quietly. Everyone else already has. I looked down at her hand, then gently pulled away. I can't forgive you, I said, but I won't pretend you never existed. Before leaving, I placed something on the table. An old architectural sketchbook. When we were kids, Olivia used to draw with me. Before law school, before competition replaced play, she stared at it like it was something from another lifetime. Outside the prison, sunlight broke through the clouds just enough to feel deliberate. My phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Blueprints approved. We did it. For the first time in a year, I smiled without flinching. A year has passed since the night I stood on that stage and believed recognition would change everything. It didn't. What changed everything was truth. My grandparents recovered slowly. They now sit in my design studio sometimes, offering advice on community spaces that feel safe. Safe. A word that means more to me now than ambition ever did. My parents stepped away from the firm. They volunteer quietly. It's not redemption, but it's an attempt. As for me, I founded my own architecture company. We specialize in public spaces built around transparency, open sightlines, no hidden corners. I think that's deliberate, because I've learned something power can't buy and status can't simulate. Integrity is not inherited. It's chosen. I still visit Olivia sometimes, not because she deserves it, but because pretending she doesn't exist would be another kind of lie. The sister who once stood between me and every spotlight now sits behind reinforced glass. And some nights, when I can't sleep, I still hear her voice. Love doesn't secure assets. But here's what I know now. Money can buy silence. Power can manipulate law. But neither can fill the emptiness in someone who never learned empathy. So I'll ask you what I've asked myself every night since. Do you believe someone can choose money and control so completely that they stop recognizing human life as sacred? Or was Olivia always this way and we just refused to see it? My story ends here, but the question still lingers.